Something just killed my dog.
Something killed your dog?
My dog went flying through the air over the tree, and I don't know how it did it.
Okay.
This is the Komodo dragon, thought for centuries to be a mythical monster, but it wasn't discovered until 1912. The giant panda, the first living specimen, wasn't captured until 1936. The okapi was also believed not to exist until 1900. In the last 100 years, 3 legends come to life. Are there any left?
I'd never seen anything like this before. Stood maybe 7 feet high and had hair all over it.
I've heard my parents and different ones talk about him. They have a name for him, Lekitlega. That's what they call him.
You could actually holler at certain times of the year, and this thing would answer with a guttural tone.
It was an extremely tall giant. His legs seemed to be long for the size of his body, even though he was tall. Giant strides.
Abominable snowmen. Abominable snowmen, as far as we in the Western world are concerned, live in the Himalayas. But the evidence for their actual existence is pretty unscientific, pretty tenuous. We have footprints, eyewitness accounts, and a few odd and rather doubtful skull caps. The image that's come down to us of the shape of these creatures is rather like this. They're usually depicted as big, hairy, heavily chested creatures with long arms, short legs, rather ape-like in proportions, with a crest on the top of the skull and a big toe that sticks out separately from other toes. It's a surprise for most people to learn that legends of the abominable snowmen and their kind occur all over the world, and including, of all places, North America. Now, perhaps it shouldn't really be a surprise, because wherever you get snowman legends, you get areas of wilderness, particularly mountain wilderness. And mountain wilderness is something that North America has plenty of. The west coast of America is characterized by vast blocks of mountain ranges running generally in a north and southerly direction. They form a barrier between the Great Plains of North America and the orange groves of the Pacific coast. Now, California, to most people, is the sophisticated Sunset Strip from San Francisco to San Diego. But in fact, California's 160,000 square miles is largely uninhabited mountains and deserts. North of California, the state of Oregon is even more of a wilderness. Only 2 million people live in its 100,000 square mile area. Further north still is Washington, a state the size of England. Again, much of it wilderness. Across the 49th parallel into Canada, the wilderness continues, with its spectacular forests, its snow mountains, and its vast waterfalls. This is all Bigfoot country, much of it unexplored and unmapped. When one realizes this country has really only been open to settlers for a little over 100 years, and that most of the population live on the coast and in the fertile valleys of the low coastal mountain ranges, it's not really difficult to accept the possibility that creatures unknown to science could live there in perfect solitude and safety. That the potential for even quite a sizable population of big feet is there, nobody would deny. But of course, this is not any sort of a proof that such creatures exist. Into this wild and empty Bigfoot country has come rather an unusual cowboy leading a rather unusual posse. His name is Roger Patterson, and for 8 years he has led similar posses into the wilderness in search not of rustlers or bad men, but on the trail of the Bigfoot. His method of tracking down a Bigfoot is reminiscent of looking for a needle in a haystack, but on a recent occasion he did, in fact, turn up a needle. But we'll come to that in a moment. First, let's hear more eyewitness reports.
Well, I'd been hunting up out of Spokane, and we hadn't got anything, so we stopped at one more spot to check it. Just as I got into the head of the canyon, I happened to glance back to one side, and there this thing was. And so when I started to turn, well, it turned and walked away from me and got into the brush real quick, and I thought then that it was a bear up on its hind legs that had maybe had a trap on a front foot or something and had run on its hind legs. So then of course I took right in after it, and I went down the canyon a little ways, and I come to another opening, and this thing was standing right out in the opening, like it was waiting for me or something. And when I come busting out into this opening, he just standing there looking at me, and I seen then that it wasn't a bear, and because it was tall, maybe 7 foot, had hair all over it, was like a man. It didn't look like an ape. It looked more like a man. You know, it didn't have the real short legs like an ape, and it walked upright, swung its arms when it walked, and you know, it was just too human to be an ape or a gorilla or something like this, but still, it wasn't a man, you know, and we just didn't know what the heck it was.
As we, Lonnie and us was approaching this curve in my Volkswagen sedan, Lonnie was sitting in the seat behind me when he tapped me on the shoulder, and he said, "Look at there." And I looked over here in this ditch line quickly. We wasn't doing probably about 35 miles an hour, and we seen what we thought was a bear. Upon raising up and the Volkswagen setting low like it was, and being on the lookout for any cattle or what on the road, we seen quickly what looked like a bear. But just as we was right dead on it, out of the corner of my low windshield, the thing raised up and looked right directly at us. We have since found that through many years, this seems to be a crossing for this being, whatever it is, here in this area at certain times of the year.
Well, I know that there is a Bigfoot because I've heard about him all my life since I was a little bit of a girl. I've heard my parents and different ones talk about him. They have a name for him, Lekitlega. That's what they call him. And as I always say, I'm not scared of him because to me, in the way I think, he's just another person. I'm not a bit scared of Bigfoot. I can go out anywhere alone on the mountains here. I'm never scared because I've heard about him all my life.
My wife and I were camping up in the mountains, and we drove into a lake called Todd Lake up in the Cascade Mountains, which is about a quarter of a mile across. We drove in there and got out of the car and started looking around for a place to camp. It had been raining, so we were trying to find a dry place. Well, while we were looking, it started to rain again. So the storm being a thunderstorm, we thought it would be over soon. We got back in the car to wait it out. We sat there in the car looking through the rain-covered windshield out across the lake. Across the lake in a meadow was a tall figure. We saw that and we couldn't believe our eyes. So to see better, we got out of the car to look at it directly. And this figure appeared to be about between 8 and 11 feet tall, standing across the lake. We thought it might be an elk standing head-on, but there were no horns. But in getting out of the car and closing the door, he probably heard us because he started striding over to the edge of the meadow into the trees. And when he turned and strode across there was no question it was not an elk. It was an extremely tall giant. His legs seemed to be long for the size of his body, even though he was tall. Giant strides. As soon as he reached the edge of the clearing into the trees, we were just petrified because we thought he might circle around and come over toward us. We jumped in the car and tried to start the engine. I flooded the engine. It wouldn't start, and we finally got it going, and we drove out of there just feeling completely scared. Never been so scared in my life.
Well, I took off in the morning up in the hills for picking huckleberries. This place that we're going to is a place he called the 6 Mile Lemon Pass. Picked for a while, and as I turned around, saw a creature standing there looking at me. I thought at first it was a grizzly or a bear, but I then looked a little closer and I found out that it looked more like a human being. I'd say between 7 and 9 feet tall, probably weighing 500 or 600 pounds. It had nails on its fingers, and the hair on it is kind of a steel grayish color. So when he stood there and looked at me, I didn't tarry too long. I took off in a hurry down to the car, and well, that's the last I saw of him.
Now back to Patterson. A few months ago in Washington, D.C., I was called in to examine and make a report on a film of the Bigfoot. But let Roger Patterson himself approach you with his story and his film.
In 1967, the 20th of October, myself and Bob Gimlin were going into Northern California area. It's in the Humboldt County there. And this is about 40 miles back in the wilderness. The nearest little settlement is a town called Orleans. There's approximately 17,000 square miles in there that are unmapped. And it's a very primitive area, very rugged area. We had been in this area trying to find evidence of the giant creatures called Bigfoot or Sasquatch. And we had been in there about a week and a half. We were camped on the Bluff Creek there. This particular day we had started up Bluff Creek and had gotten about 4 miles or so from our camp. And we had started to come around a bend. I was riding this little horse here. His name's Peanuts. And he shied and jumped backwards and reared up. And as he did, I tried to pull him down, and as I did so, I pulled too hard and we both fell to the ground. I was able to get up, and as I held the horse by the reins and come around him, I then looked over to my left and I seen this creature. And it was standing by the creek there about 120 feet away from us. And then it started moving away from us, walked up the bank and turned around, looked at us again, and I was able to get into my saddlebags and get my camera out and start shooting pictures. I yelled at Bob to cover me in case the creature did turn and attack us. At this point, when I was able to start getting pictures, she had walked up the bank and was going on across this sandbar. Well, I ran directly, kind of a 3/4 from towards her actually, and run across the creek. I was able to come up on the other side, and I got some fairly good pictures. The creature was massive. I would say that it was 7 to 7.5 feet tall and probably 350 to 500 pounds. It was taking an average of 43-inch stride walking, and they measured 14.5 inches long, each print, and 5.5 inches wide. Bob Gimlin had seen this thing much better than I did because he was looking at it directly and I was trying to look through a camera. However, I could see it plain enough, and it was quite a great moment for me.
Now, before we examine this film in any more detail, I'd like to call in some expert witnesses, and in particular, one who spent the greater part of his professional life in the pursuit of monsters. Now, he's also written some very entertaining, very amusing books dealing with snowmen of all sorts, kinds, and shapes. Ivan T. Sanderson. Now, I asked Ivan, first of all, how closely the Californian Bigfoot resembled the idea that we all have of the Abominable Snowman.
Well, first of all, let me clear the air on one thing, if I may, John. I don't think that this is an abominable snowman of any type, and it shouldn't be called that. but we simply use the term because it's a term people know.
Just how long have the stories of the Sasquatch, Bigfoot, been current?
Well, current amongst Europeans ever since they first got there. They began to hear about them. And there are some reports of miners having been attacked by these creatures way back in the 49ers, and all that, 1849. But, of course, the Amerindians, whom I've spent many, many days and weeks with, all the way from the Alaskan Panhandle right the way down to Central California, they just roar with laughter at any outsider who doesn't believe in these things. And their traditions are absolutely completely full of them. So, of course, if you step over the Canadian border, it goes back even further. And we have one very astonishing case up there of Jocko, but if we've got time to tell you about him.
Oh, I think we have.
And I think I'm right in saying it was in 1884 when they were building, no, they had already built the Trans-Canada Highway.
As the train was pulling up the Fraser Gorge, a strange furry creature was seen lying by the track. The engineers stopped the train, and after a hair-raising chase over a rocky bluff, the creature was captured. It was taken to Yale. The Daily British Colonist described Jacko, as they called it, as being 4 feet 11 inches tall and weighing 127 pounds.
And there the story ends, for no further reports have ever come to light. What happened to Jacko remains a mystery. But this was no isolated case. Bigfoot stories have existed in the folklore of the American Indians for so long that he takes them for granted. But as the Wild West was tamed, the white man came across Bigfoot. The stories began to pour in, and they haven't stopped yet.
In 1864, a surveyor with the Hudson's Bay Company had huge rocks hurled at him by a large, hairy creature.
He escaped unhurt. But in 1890, footprints were found round a mining camp.
The miners set out to track down the mysterious intruder. On returning, they found the mutilated bodies of their 2 guards, apparently beaten to death by being repeatedly thrown to the ground.
Theodore Roosevelt, once President of the United States of America, wrote of a similar story in 1892.
A young trapper friend of Teddy's returned to camp after a day's hunting, only to find his partner killed and big footprints around the body.
But Bigfoot isn't always reported to be a killer.
In 1961, Albert Ostman, a prospector in British Columbia, claims to have been kidnapped by a whole family of Bigfoot. He says that they appeared to be human-like, and they communicated with a strange grunting kind of language.
They didn't harm him. Ostman claimed that he was fed with roots and berries, and this is substantiated by similar reports.
In 1901, Bigfoot was seen washing roots in a lake on Vancouver Island. He has also been seen digging for clams at night and eating berries from a bush.
Stories like these were only small-time local news until October 1958.
Gerald Crew, working for a logging company in Bluff Creek, California, found 16-inch long footprints all round his car. At first he thought it was a joke, but a journalist published his story in the local paper, and it started a whole flood of correspondence and news stories about Bigfoot that for the first time gained nationwide coverage.
Well, now, we've got to make some kind of assumptions looking at this film without prejudging whether this film is all it purports to be. Let's just assume for the moment that the creature we're seeing is a real, valid, living creature. Now, here's a problem. This is in North America. Now, as far as I know, the earliest recording of man in North America is about 18,000 years ago. But quite clearly, this creature antedates that by a considerable amount. Now, Darwin stressed, and I think all evidence has proved subsequently, that man evolved in Africa. Now, Africa's an awful long way from North America. And I think the real problem we've got to face is how did early man get from Africa and perhaps from Asia into North America? Now, this is a real zoogeographical problem, and I think it's one we've got to try and answer.
Well, let's start supposing, like we say down here in southern China, and go all the way on up to Siberia and then around over the top, over the Bering Straits and down to California on this side, you see. Yeah. We've had those land bridges across there on 4 separate occasions, I understand, is the most acceptable theory today.
It is obvious to a geographer that warm-blooded animals could have migrated from Asia to North America within the last million years, for that matter, by way of two land bridges that existed between Asia and North America. These two were the Bering Straits area, which is now about 55 miles wide, separating Siberia and Alaska. The other is the Aleutian Island Ridge, which now contains a few islands with water up to 150 feet between them. But at the time that they were exposed, the ridge was above water and the islands stood up as mountains above the ridge. And this ridge connected the Kamchatka Peninsula of Siberia with southern Alaska. So these two land bridges existed where warm-blooded animals could migrate from Asia to North America. Now, the question probably comes to your mind is, well, this is a pretty formidable area now. Wouldn't it be awful uncomfortable for warm-blooded animals to migrate under those conditions? Well, this is a strange thing, but it's known to have happened. Actually, the currents, the broad surface currents we know in the oceans of the world today, like the Gulf Stream, which is a warm one, was strengthened considerably during those periods to a point that it did not confine itself to just the North Atlantic Ocean, but broke through a barrier into the Arctic Ocean. This, of course, made conditions along the northern edge of Alaska and Siberia very amicable, to a point that flowering plants grew and even some trees.
Now, what I'm trying to put to you is the evolutionary possibilities. We know that man evolved in Africa, at least we believe this to be so. We also recognize at least 3 grades in the evolution of man towards modern man. First of all, you've got the Australopithecines from South Africa, and as far as we know, they didn't leave Africa. They were rather small people, very small, 4'6", 5 foot in height. Then we have the so-called pithecanthropines, their common names, Java man and Pekin man. They were very much bigger. And then we have a third grade, which really perhaps is not strictly a linear grade, but should be mentioned. This is rather a side branch, the Neanderthal man, who lived 30,000 years ago. Now, which of these 3 grades do you think would have crossed your Bering Strait and become an ancestor to the Bigfoot?
Java man, Pekin man, that lot. We've got them way up north in Pekin man. But I'd like to add one more thing there. I don't know if you know the works of a very remarkable American by the name of Gladwin. His theory is, mind you only, that all stages of the hominid development from the time we split away from the other primates and were recognizable as such have come over to the not the United States, but the Americas. Yeah. First of all, the little pygmy type, like Australopithecans, like Dr. Dart's things. He says the first layer was sort of small stature. And then the sort of man-sized type, which would be your Java man type. He said some of them got here, too.
If one imagines what the early hominids could have been like that might have populated this hemisphere, let us say, as far back as 500,000 years ago, if we wanted to imagine this as a possibility, they would almost certainly not have resembled the reported Bigfoot creature. They would have been relatively small in stature, more or less 5 feet, give or take a little bit, females smaller than males. I'm not sure that their foot structure, in fact, would have been the foot structure that has been reported for this creature, which is, shall we say, ultra-human.
Film is not scientific evidence. I don't think anybody would possibly agree to this, because we know the way films can be manipulated. What other than film is there in the way of evidence that would be accepted by a scientific community of these Bigfoot creatures?
Well, we have hairs, alleged, and in my opinion, very much alleged, bunches of hair that have been found stuck into bark on trees at a certain level. And some of those hairs, as a matter of fact, have been examined, and we can't match them. But you'll have to get an expert on hairs, a trichologist, to do that.
Now, by examining hair, one can not tell whether a hair which appears to be human is really human, because there is so great a variation in hair and in this scale makeup that in various parts of one human being, the diameter of the hair and therefore the scale on the cuticle may be of various sizes, and this would overlap with many animal populations. On the other hand, in some cases, you can tell whether hair is definitely non-human, because the coloring material may be in the medulla or in the cuticle. And the coloring material in human beings is always, or almost always, in the cortex. Therefore, in some instances, as in the case of hair which was sent to me from California a few years ago, we were able to ascertain that the hair was not primate or human being, but in essence, we believe it belonged to a moose.
Secondly, there are a number of droppings, scat, they call it in America, or feces as such, which have been found. But what interests me about those most of all is not the scat itself, but the parasites found in it. There were eggs and larvae of certain nematode worms. And if I've just got a moment to try and put over the significance of this, there were two different types of these parasitic worms. Now, I might stress the parasitic worm cannot swim the Pacific. Yet these parasitic worms are found in pigs and human beings in southern China, as you'll see from the map. It's quite a long way, all the way up to the Bering Straits and all the way down again, because they aren't found again until they are found in pigs imported from China, in California, and in a few Amerindian tribes there have been reported from, and in this scat. Now, that to me is one of the most significant points of all.
I think it's a very good point, but conceivably there could have been some kind of vector, some kind of animal that carried this particular type of nematode worm.
It could be, and but it had gotten around too, and it couldn't have been a marine animal, I don't think.
Yes, but it's circumstantial evidence. I think it's perfectly good evidence, but it is circumstantial.
I think the only thing that is not merely circumstantial is, of course, the foot tracks, because it is in the circumstances, not under the circumstances, in which these foot tracks were found. Let us stick to Northern California. It would be almost impossible in a very high percentage of the cases, and don't forget there are hundreds of reports, thousands now, for them to have been made artificially.
Overall, is there any similarity between all these footprints that you've seen? Do they seem to belong to the same group, same species?
Well, in my opinion, there is, but I'm not an expert on feet. They seem to me, I pin that on them all being so very hominid in appearance, but there's a number of points and some casts which we've got here, John, that I'd like to ask you about, as you are an expert.
Well, what about size? I mean, is there any variation?
Well, I just only today heard that they have found ones only about yay size.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Running along beside some of the big ones. And of all sizes, from about the size of a human hand, which I presume might be a baby or a youngster who would just walk, toddler, up to the biggest one that I've ever seen, which is this chap here, which is actually 22.5 inches long. Can you go and really see what's going on?
What sort of soil was that found in?
It was very, very firm clay mud, as a matter of fact.
Now that's a really big one. This one here we've got seems to be something a little more. I mean, we can begin to accept this one. This is sort of astronomical. This is big, but at least one can begin to see that, you know, it's not so utterly outrageous. Would you think this is fairly typical of these things?
This is the most typical to me, and that is why I made both the male and the female casts of it, because, and that's about standard size, standard chassis size.
Well, this is what, 15, 16
Somewhere
inches?
around. Yep.
Well, now, the thing that strikes me straight away is this must have been made in a fairly glutinous, fairly sticky surface, because you've got the impression of toes bent flexed like this, so that as this creature was striding forward, these toes were gripping into the ground, including the big toe, which is odd, because usually man keeps his big toe pretty stiff when he's unless he is in a particularly slippery situation.
I may say that this was very sticky clay, and he was going up a slight incline.
Well, this is just exactly what you'd expect, isn't it? The other thing I notice about it is, and this supports the veracity of this particular print, is that you always get this particular characteristic in the human footprint of a deeper print on the outer side of the foot. Here's a little toe, this is the outer border of the foot, and here you've got a very much deeper imprint than you have here on the inner side, because man tends to take his weight on the outer side of his foot.
Sort of roll over.
He rolls from the outer side towards the big toe, and his final sort of takeoff in his stride is from the big toe.
I'm interested in footprints because footprints tell you such a remarkable lot about the animal sitting above the foot, as it were. You can tell a great deal about its height, you can tell a lot about its weight, you can tell something about its posture, and you can tell how it walks. Now, Patterson, if I remember rightly, measured this in this particular creature that we saw in the film, and he states that the stride was 43 inches, which is quite some stride. If you try to do it yourself, you'd really be stretching your legs out in order to get that distance. And I think this might be worth bearing in mind as we watch another run-through of this film at ordinary speed. Two really extraordinary things about this walk is, first of all, its exaggerated nature. Now, it's a human walk, all right. That is, the individual components add up to the typical human walking, striding, as we call it, gait. But the way it is performed is unnatural. And it's very, very difficult to see why, but we'll return to that in a moment. The second point is that this creature is walking like a man, not like a woman. There's quite distinct differences between the gait of men and women, and this is a typical male gait, particularly in the extension of the stretching of the hip during the last part of the stride when it's behind the body. Now, this exaggerated gait, why are those arms swinging in such an outrageous way? It seems to me that the answer lies in the fact that this creature is taking an unnaturally big stride. Perhaps he is trying to span as much distance as he can. After all, 43 inches, as we said just now, is a big stride. And it would require an effort to stride that distance. Now, if the relationship between arm swinging and stride is rather interesting, and I'd like to demonstrate this to you. I can best demonstrate it on myself. If you keep your arms down by your side and stride with my left leg in this case, well forward like that, an unnatural big stride for me, you'll notice my leg is forward, but my face and my body are facing this way, almost at right angles. Now, to correct this, and this is part of the normal walk, the opposite arm swings forward, the right arm swings forward as the left leg goes forward. This corrects the twist on the body, so now I'm facing in the direction in which I am going. So this is the normal procedure. But I want you to notice in a very, very slowed up version of this film just how exaggerated this arm swing is. And I think it relates to the big effort this creature is putting into making a big stride out of his walk. Another rather exaggerated element of the walk is the way this creature seems to lift his foot at each step. We lift our feet to clear the ground, obviously, but this seems a little exaggerated, rather like a man walking through thick mud or through a stream or something of that sort. Now, turning from the walking part to the shape of the animal itself, you'll notice it's got very, very heavy shoulders and neck, massive neck muscles, a big head, strong shoulders, and it tends to taper away towards not so little legs, they're good size, but they certainly, there seems to be disproportionately bigger upper part. Now, this means that the centre of gravity of this animal must be fairly high, somewhere in the middle of the spine, about this level, whereas man's centre of gravity is right down in his pelvis. He's more balanced around this point in the mid-pelvis. This is associated with man's particular walk. If you had a centre of gravity higher, as would appear from this picture to be so, then you would expect the walk to be quite different, not a stride, but more of a waddle. Now, one or two other characters I think that are of interest. First of all, you see the creature has buttocks. Now, this is a human character. Among the primates, only the human primates have got buttocks, and this is related to their particular way of walking and standing. The other point is the opposite side. It appears to have, you may have seen, large, heavy, pendulous breasts. This is in spite of the fact that I said just now that the gait was very like that of a man. It certainly, on external evidence, appears to have these breasts, and they're hairy breasts, and we'll hear more about those in a moment or two. Finally, I think you probably can see that the top of the head seems to be rather conical, rather pointed. Now this, if it is what it appears to be, should represent a bony crest on the top of the head. I think in this gorilla skull, a male gorilla, you'll see that there is a quite marked bony crest. This is rather a young one, and in the full adults, the crest is perhaps 1.5 inches high. There's also another crest here. This closed with hair would, in fact, give a sort of conical appearance to the head. The reason you have a crest is because of the small brain case and the heavy jaws. Heavy jaws requiring big muscles requiring lots of bone to become attached to. A small brain case doesn't provide enough bone, so you grow a bit up here and up here for attachment of those muscles. Now, I've pointed out to you quite a number of inconsistencies related to the skull, related to the posture, and related to the walk. And it's just these sort of scientific observations that have created an atmosphere of healthy skepticism among other scientists who've seen the film in America.
I have been most impressed with the fact that this creature has one anatomical feature which, if indeed it does exist, is the only one in existence. The animal has large pendulous breasts which are covered with thick fur. Now, if this indeed does exist, it is most unique, because all living mammals, even the most furry ones, have breasts which are quite naked. That is, they're not completely naked, but they're covered with very short hair.
But what strikes me and what gives me such skepticism is the peculiar configuration of a gorilla body and gorilla upper limbs and trunk, gorilla head, and human lower legs.
The only real thing we can work with is the photograph and the footprint. Now, I've looked at the photographs, and one thing I think I noticed is that the sole of the foot does not have the characters of the footprint. Rather looks like an old pancake to me with no sole characters in it.
I had seen also two alleged casts of footprints of these animals, and my suspicion that these were trumped up in some way were confirmed by the fact that there seemed to be no distribution of weight in such a way which would indicate that the animal had in fact walked and used its foot.
In the case of animals, the okapi, the giant panda, or the gorilla, these animals were found only 20 or 30 years after the theory of evolution was put forth and substantiated. But there are 100 years now of people systematically hunting around for fossils of all kinds, and there is no evidence anywhere of a giant bipedal hominid. There is only one hominid, and that's man.
It is possible that such a creature exists. It is highly improbable that it does. I may be speaking to you from the moon today, but this is highly improbable by 2 hours from now. And if you brought a whole series of photographs in to me of animals that I had never seen before, I cannot say that those animals don't exist, but I can indicate that it is highly improbable that there are 12-legged horses running around in some relatively unexplored areas. So we work on probability bases in science and possibility basis, and I think the possibility of a large primate living in an area with relatively little primate food, with an extremely severe winter, is highly improbable and unlikely.
What we've seen is certainly not acceptable as scientific evidence. Indeed, some of you may already be feeling that you've been looking at rather a splendid hoax, and that the actor is really a bit of a ham. Yet, talking to Roger Patterson, as I have done, it's very hard not to believe in him. It's also hard to entirely dismiss this film based on its rather unpromising face value. We've seen the film, and therefore we've only got the impression, the visual impression of this creature. You and Bob Gimlin were there, so you had the chance of absorbing other sort of sensory impressions, such as sound or smell. Now, is there anything you can tell us about it which we cannot appreciate from the film?
We did detect a definite smell once that we had crossed the creek and got to the place where this creature had been. There was a strong, musky smell, a little hard for me to describe. It seemed somewhat like a dog that maybe had rolled in something dead and got into water afterwards, and this whole thing turned into a rather unpleasant odor.
Roger Patterson, do you believe what you saw? Or do you think you could possibly have been the victim of a hoax?
I don't believe that there was any possibility that this was a hoax. The creature, to both of us, appeared very natural. The muscle movement to us that it was much plainer, I think, than what it shows in the film. Indicated that it wasn't anything made up. This area is back in about 40 miles in from the nearest settlement, and it's in a very rugged terrain. For somebody to have been at the right place or know where we was going, because we didn't have anything planned, we were going in different directions, would have been extremely unlikely. It was hunting season up in that area at this time, and I doubt if anybody would be up there roaming around in something like this just for the fun of it.
A risk, in other words.
It'd be a tremendous risk for somebody, because some people will shoot anything that looks like this.
Well, our impression of you is the impression that we've got from the film, and there you are riding in a very sort of elegant style through the forest. Now, is this your normal habitat? Is this what you normally do?
In the last few years has been practically all that I have been doing. I have a small horse ranch in Washington State, up out of Yakima, Washington, that I breed quarter horses, and also have some Australian dogs there that I breed. And this has been partly how some of my income has come in, and it kept me going on this thing.
What are your plans for the future?
We have an expedition that we're forming right now to go into the area, into that Northern California area, and also into other parts of the Northwest. And our ultimate goal is to capture one of these creatures alive and unharmed. We're also, of course, hoping to get pictures and find more tracks and find where these things exist the most. I've brought back pictures of this creature. I've brought back tape recordings of many, many people that have seen these things throughout the Northwest. It doesn't seem to, it hasn't done the job of proving it, and I didn't think it would. Now we have to capture one and prove this, and I might say that if it takes me the rest of my life, I'm going to do it.
We shall have to wait and see whether Patterson does succeed in producing a real live Bigfoot. Of course, his job is not so easy now. As it is with all mythical creatures, the legends are often exploited in special ways for special purposes. For instance, in Willow Creek area, it has been suggested that the shrewd mining operators have created footprints of Bigfoot in order to frighten off the petty pilferers, particularly the Indians, who are believing in this case in their own legends. Now, these sort of instances tend to produce rather skeptical witnesses.
Well, the only tracks that I've seen that were supposed to be Bigfoot tracks, I've actually seen them being made. Somebody was wearing plastic feet and was making the tracks.
The commercial interests in Humboldt County, where Patterson filmed his creatures, haven't been slow to exploit such myths and legends as do exist. Here at Willow Creek, Bigfoot is big business. Indeed, each year, footprints painted on these sidewalks announce the forthcoming Bigfoot Days, spelt, incidentally, D-A-Z-E. and the natives paid tribute to a life-size redwood statue of their patron saint, who symbolizes a hopeful prosperity for locals only too anxious to fulfill the tourist curiosity. Willow Creek aims to be a big Bigfoot tourist center, but one can't help thinking, looking round at the vast empty mountains that encircle the place, that the joke might, just might, eventually backfire. Is there a Bigfoot? Personally, I'd like to think there was. If it exists, it is, by all accounts, human or subhuman. It's a nice thought, but would that make it an American citizen? Would it in fact get the vote? Well, before we get too facetious, even if we have made up our minds about Patterson's film, and I'm sure most of you have by now, should we really discard the idea of an unknown animal, perhaps even a human animal, living in the wilderness of America? From my point of view, it's good scientific policy to keep at least part of one's mind open. And I've allotted about 5% of mine on this particular issue. Now, in this brief survey, we've asked all the participants what their views are. Now, I wonder what yours are.
Well, I truly believe that there is such a creature.
No, considering the evidence that we have and the lack of evidence about bony parts, I do not believe in the Californian Bigfoot.
I don't care what anybody says. There is something that is here in Northern California, and I have seen it myself.
And until I have some tangible evidence, I don't believe that such a creature is a living mammal in Northern California.
I don't ask other people to believe it because I know it sounds fantastic, but I do because I saw it.
I should like to very much to believe in it, but I do not.
I'm firmly of a belief that he does exist and that he is a subhuman creature.
I would regard this as some kind of other mammal or as some kind of hoax, and at the moment I'm more inclined to believe that it's a hoax than it is some other unknown mammal.
Definitely. I saw one.
No, I don't believe in Bigfoot at all because, in fact, I know better. There isn't any such thing.
Frankly, I just think the answer is yes.
I don't believe in ghosts, but I'd be scared to death if I saw one.
I realize that the conception of these giant creatures, they're called Bigfoot, is a fantastic subject, and a lot of people scoff at it and don't believe it, but I believe it. I'm convinced that these creatures exist, and I'm going to prove it if it takes me the rest of my life.